Hi, I recently went to see a therapist and it went badly. I ended up feeling damn near suicidal, which is pretty awful, made even worse by the fact that I only actually went there because of my arachnophobia. So I think I need to explain a thing or two about phobias. Phobias are by definition irrational. You can have a fear that a situation will occur, which becomes a phobia if your fear of it occurring is far greater than the likelihood that it will occur. For instance, a fear of falling from a great height is perfectly rational if you're standing at the edge of a long drop. It's your self-preservation instincts doing what they do. If you're sitting on the ground and there are no heights from which to fall, and you're still scared that you're going to fall to your death, then that's a phobia. You can also have a fear of an object that becomes a phobia if the object in question can't hurt or harm you. For instance, fear of an unexploded bomb is rational because if it explodes it's going to kill you, whereas fear of a computer mouse, for instance, is not rational because that object isn't dangerous. It can't hurt you, it can't harm you. If you're scared of it, it's a phobia. And these two types of phobia are different. In a way, they're opposites because one's a fear of something which is unlikely to occur but would kill you if it did, and the other's a fear of something that will almost certainly occur on a regular basis but won't harm you. Attempting to convince someone who fears falling to their death while sitting on the ground that a fall from a great height won't harm them is, to put it mildly, stupid. If you do fall from a great height, you're probably dead, obviously. The irrational thing that needs to be treated there isn't the fear of falling, it's the situation in which this person thinks that they're going to fall, i.e. while sitting on the ground in a completely flat environment, which needs to be addressed because that situation is so unlikely to occur. Unless there's a sinkhole, which is pretty rare, you're just not going to fall to your death in the absence of a long drop from which to fall. The fear of something happening isn't the same as the expectation that it's going to happen. I don't have this kind of phobia, but I reckon it's more about anxiety than panic. There's probably a bit of paranoia mixed in there. I would imagine it's a constant fear that wears you down slowly as opposed to being something more immediate. Whereas when it comes to the person with a fear of computer mice, attempting to convince them that computer mice won't occur is stupid. Of course they're going to come across a mouse from time to time. Computers are everywhere. It's irrational to claim that the situation won't occur. The phobia here, the bit that needs treatment, the thing that makes it an unfortunate psychological quirk, is the terror induced by a harmless object. It would take one hell of a freak accident for a computer mouse to harm you. So that's the bit that requires treatment, the fear of the actual object itself when it's right there in front of you. This type of phobia is more about panic than anxiety. There's not a lot of anxiety when the object that you're scared of isn't actually there, and then there's this sudden burst of utter mind-numbing terror when it is. One's an anxiety overload and the other's a panic overload, or to use an analogy, think of one as Chinese water torture and the other as waterboarding. Now, more often than not, people with a phobia know that their fears are rational. A person describing their fear as a phobia would be unlikely to do that if they thought their fear was reasonable. Someone who believes that cats are the servants of Satan, for instance, isn't going to tell you that they have a phobia of cats. They're going to tell you that cats are dangerous. They're going to try to convince you to be scared of cats too. And they're certainly not going to seek therapy for it, because instead of recognising the fear of cats as a problem, they're going to think the existence of cats is the issue. That's kind of more of a delusion than a phobia, because although there's fear going on there, it's the belief that cats are evil that's the irrational bit that should be treated, rather than the fear itself. If cats actually were evil, it would be perfectly rational to be scared of them. So I'd say that's kind of on the borderline, sort of a phobia, sort of not a phobia. My phobia is spiders. I don't hate them, I don't feel any animosity towards them whatsoever. I'm also fully aware that the spiders you find in Britain aren't dangerous. But if I come into contact with a spider, I'm going to panic in a way that you don't usually see in a human being. It overrides my logic and common sense, and it can make me violent. When I'm in that state, my one goal is getting away from that spider. Nothing else exists in that moment. The panic and the terror are the phobia. It's intense fear, it's not rational, I'm not delusional, therefore it's a phobia. I also experience anxiety when I'm entering an environment where I'm likely to encounter spiders, for instance my shed. There are spiders in there, they are large and hairy. I experience the anxiety because I know how bad the panic's likely to be if a spider touches me or gets too close. The anxiety isn't the phobia. The anxiety is perfectly rational because the situation that I'm worrying about, encountering a spider, experiencing extreme panic, it's likely to happen. It's the most unpleasant thing I know of. The anxiety is a symptom of my phobia, but it's not actually the phobia itself. And that's something that's almost always misunderstood. So obviously, I am scared of the consequences of an encounter with a spider. I want to avoid the physical consequences, like thrashing around till I injure myself or somebody else, tearing my fingernails out trying to climb a wall to get away from the spider, leaping off a tall ladder because breaking my legs isn't as bad as encountering a spider, stabbing someone who's trying to shove a spider in my face because my instincts think that that little creature is the greatest threat I've ever faced and I have to defend myself at any cost. I can't control these consequences because in these situations my body is reacting all on its own without my conscious mind really getting involved at all. It's a lot like when you touch a red hot piece of metal and your arm jerks back automatically. It's pretty hard to grip a red hot piece of metal and hold onto it because your fingers are going to unclench the moment you touch it. I also want to avoid the actual terror, like I want to avoid being doused in petrol and set on fire. The fear that I experience when a spider gets too close is the worst thing that I have ever experienced in my life. It's a primordial, last-ditch attempt to survive kind of fear. It's not realistic to expect a person to be able to simply grit their teeth and ignore this. Your body's evolved not to be able to ignore it for really good reasons. It's there to get you away from lethal things fast. It's just a problem when it starts misfiring and identifying things like spiders as a threat. Another way to explain it is my amygdala thinks that spiders are the greatest threat that exists, and my amygdala can and will take control of my body in order to keep me safe from them. My frontal lobe is not scared of spiders, but it is scared of the stupid things it knows my amygdala will do if there's a spider. This brings me to the overused phrase, face your fear. This cliche has quite a lot of problems. You see it in films and TV a lot. Someone faces their fear and it instantly vanishes. But please try to remember that what you see in fiction isn't real. The way that fictional characters react is the way the writer thinks real people react in real life. Writers are capable of misunderstanding reality. As an example, Sherlock Holmes drew a conclusion or two from the study of phrenology. In the stories, his conclusions were correct because Conan Doyle thought that phrenology was an accurate science. In reality, his conclusions would have been critically flawed because phrenology has since been proved to be absolute bunk. Sherlock Holmes was written as a mega-genius, but the person doing the writing was a normal, ordinary, boring, run-of-the-mill genius. So stuff that happens in fiction is sometimes fictional. Conventional wisdom says that phobias come from traumatic experiences. I don't think that's always true, but I think a traumatic experience is likely to cause a phobia. Face your fear is sometimes really bad advice. Don't face your fear if the likelihood of things going badly wrong is greater than the likelihood of you losing your fear. If you're scared of dogs, it might not be a good idea to trap yourself in a room with a dog. You might lose your fear, but then again, you might just create another traumatic experience and reinforce your fear. If you're going to do that, if you're going to try and lose your fear that way, get some safety precautions in place. Make sure it's not an aggressive dog. Don't trap yourself in there. Have someone there to hold the dog back if you start freaking out. Start with a docile dog that's on a leash. Do it in stages. Beware of idiots who are going to try and talk you out of the safety precautions. Some people claim to believe that being thrown in at the deep end is the way to deal with all these things, and they're not right. They're just really, really thick with a lot of confidence. These kind of idiots will probably try to force the object you fear onto you against your will. Never, ever, ever try to force the object of someone's fear onto them under the guise of helping them to face their fear. Massive exposure to something is highly unlikely to fix a phobia. Take my arachnophobia as an example. The cottage I grew up in is very rural, really quite ancient, and it was well on its way to becoming a ruin when I was a kid. So there were spiders everywhere. They were huge, they were hairy. I'd hear them running across the wall when I was trying to sleep. Sometimes I'd be on the floor playing with my toys and they'd come straight at me from under the furniture. So if sudden massive exposure to something could cure a phobia, then surely all that exposure to spiders that I had as a young child would have sort of inoculated me against developing a phobia in the first place. I'm not sure how I ended up scared of spiders, but it seems likely that it came from being unable to escape from them. So how would being placed in a situation where I can't escape from spiders fix my phobia of spiders? My subconscious associates spiders with trauma. It thinks spiders are trauma. So adding more trauma is likely to add more trauma. Imagine somebody's been raped and they've developed a fear of sex as a result. Do you think forcing sex on them is going to make it all better, or do you think it's going to make it much, much worse? I don't think for a minute that anybody really believes this kind of thinking is correct, but nasty little sadists are something that exists, and making somebody else cower lets them pretend that they're big and strong and powerful and superior for a little while. I think these people would hate it if you actually did overcome your phobia, because then they'd lose their opportunity to feel better than you. We all know these people. They're not trying to help you. They know they're only reinforcing your fear. They're bog standard, ordinary, boring bullies. Trying to cure a phobia like this is a lot like trying to extract a confession under torture. Your victim is very likely to tell you whatever it is they think you want to hear, like, "Yes, you've cured me. How wonderful. Now will you leave me alone, please?" I'm aware that I haven't given any advice on how to cure a phobia, because I don't know. If I did know, I wouldn't have a phobia. I would have followed my own advice and cured myself. What prompted me to make this video is I admitted defeat. I realised I couldn't fix my phobia on my own, so I went to see a therapist. And what I've said in this video is the stuff that my therapist couldn't get her head round. I couldn't get her to understand. I couldn't explain it to her. She would not listen. I'm not going to go into detail about what happened in those sessions because it would take hours, but basically I got the feeling that she'd memorised one textbook on psychology and that was the extent of her study. Somewhere in that textbook I think it must have said maintain eye contact in order to build trust, because she stared me down something awful and that was creepy as hell. She was trying to treat my fear of spiders as if it were a delusion that spiders exist, whereas they obviously do exist. I think she memorised the wrong textbook. What I'm really trying to say is knowing all this stuff won't make somebody able to work miracles, and I don't expect miracles, but when you have someone whose job is to help people get over phobias and they can't differentiate between an instinctive terror and an irrational belief, or they think that panic and anxiety are exactly the same thing, or they think the way to fix somebody's phobia is to make them hide their symptoms, or they can't define a phobia, how the hell is that person going to be of any help? You really need to understand the problem before you can solve it, don't you? You might as well say that my phobia comes from an imbalance of the humours or from demonic possession if that's your level of understanding. It's just prehistoric. And I really don't understand how this stuff isn't common knowledge among people whose job is to understand this stuff. It's really quite basic. This is stuff I've been able to logic out myself without reading any textbooks. If you memorised one textbook on psychology and this wasn't in it, it's probably because the publishers thought it was too basic. Point is, people who are getting paid to understand this stuff should understand it. It's not an unreasonable expectation at all. So, should anyone watching this video happen to be a phobia therapist who wasn't already aware of the things that I've said in this video, you're welcome. Take this free information and try to be less horrific at your job. If you're a phobia therapist who already understood this stuff, then that's great, because I need a competent therapist who has an IQ higher than that of a chihuahua. If you're based somewhere near Herefordshire and you think you can refrain from insulting my intelligence by trying to convince me that spiders don't exist if you don't believe in them, like my last therapist did, then please get in touch, because I'd like to book some sessions, please.